Principal Matters Podcast, episode 496. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, back with my co host, Dr. Jen Schwanke. And Jen, this week we're going to have a special guest, Lauren Berlin from the great state of California. She's done wonderful work as a school leader and also in consulting leaders. But before we do that, we have a question of the week. And our question of the week is supported by Summer Pop's math workbooks. Principals, when students practice math over the summer, their math scores go up. What is your summer math plan this year? A great way to start is by ordering free summer workbook samples at summerpopsworkbooks.com. Reach out to my friend Pete there today and get your free samples. Okay, Jen, here's our question of the week from a principal. I'm planning my PD for next year and I want to pour into my leadership team. What suggestions do you have for making my good intentions a reality?
You're going to go first on this one, Will.
Okay, I will. Because I've been thinking about it. So I'll say a couple of things, and again, our Q&A is only 5 minutes, so this could go much longer. But thing one, intentions don't become realities unless you schedule something. So take a look at your calendar for next year and ask when would be a consistent, but also realistic time where I could meet with my leaders regularly so that I could pour into them. And if you already have a place built in for consistent touch bases with your leaders, that might be a good place to make that happen. If you don't, you're going to have to take a hard look at your calendar and ask, where can I make this happen? Thing two, I'll say is before you start making grand plans, ask your leaders, what would it look like if I poured into you? What would be some things you would want to learn? What would you want that format to look like? How often would you want to do that? Because getting feedback from the people you're trying to serve is always going to help you shape the thing that you want to do when you're pouring into them. And then I guess I'll say one more thing, Jen, and that's that not every leader on a team needs the same kind of pouring into. And so even though you can pour into a team, you also need to be ready to think about the different skills that people are bringing, so that either you can focus on those individual strengths or have them pouring into each other too. So I'll start there. What are you thinking?
I'm going to piggyback on that second part that you just covered, which is make sure your intentions are fair and needed. And by that, I mean, I hear this listener, I want to pour into my leadership team. Well, do they need it? Do they want it? Are they ready for it? And will they receive it? Because if you spend the entire year putting a ton of energy into them and they're not quite sure why, or if they're like, yeah, I already knew that. Or if you have a vision that they're not aware of, you might just waste a year. And so I would, like you said, I'd start with that, sit them down and say, I'm ready. I'm ready to pour into you. And first of all, look at their expressions and see if that's a good welcome conversation. And if not, maybe just slow the roll a little bit and think about how to make it something that they're asking for as opposed to something that you decided they needed. Because, our leaders, our teacher leaders are critical to, first of all, our balance and our mental health, to be honest. To have that team, we just talked about community in a recent episode. To have that community of shared leadership is so critical to a principal's success. So you'll not want to alienate them. You'll want to make sure that they're pouring into you as you pour into them and everybody gets filled up.
Oh, good stuff. I'll add a couple of more thoughts too that are just kind of practical suggestions, which is okay, if I'm clear on intentions, I'm clear on scheduling, I'm clear on kind of what they want or don't want, then what might that look like pouring into them? And I think that answer is very varied. I'm not going to prescribe it. I'll just give you some ideas. I've seen leaders do book studies with their teams where they all are just reading something in common so they can just bring it, talk about it, unpack it, and then say, how does this apply to our work? I've seen leaders who have gone through a series together, like what I do with the Grow Academy and what you've done, Jen, with new principals or aspiring principals. Our first year, we've both done a lot of PD where we walk people through the kind of the different parts of leadership expectations for growing in your leadership. And so there's usually resources out there where you can do that. And then the third thing I would say is, um, in addition to either content or book studies, you might want to consider too just ask really good questions, because a lot of times pouring into others isn't necessarily just you giving advice or you giving feedback. It's also probing and asking good coaching questions. And I've recommended this resource to everybody I know in the last couple of years, but I use Michael Bungay Stanier's book, The Coaching Habit, because it has 7 questions that I use as a guide when I'm just trying to ask really probing questions. So those are just some things to keep in mind on the kind of the practical side of pouring into leaders.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I think that I love this commitment of the listener, and I think it's a wise move. Really focus on those leaders. But a few introductory conversations might be really helpful.
Well, reach back to Jen or me if you're planning to do something like this coming into the year, because we'd love to collaborate with you or hear your success stories. And so, Jen, how can listeners stay connected with you?
Yep, they can find me at jenschwanke.com, and there they can sign up for my weekly newsletter that's hopefully a lot of fun. So find me there, jenschwanke.com.
Yeah, sign up for Principal Problems newsletter, and then you can find today's resources and all of the other information you're going to learn from today's guest at our website at williamdparker.com. Until next time, thanks for doing what matters, and I know you're going to enjoy Lauren Berlin. Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Why is IXL used in 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts? Because it works. IXL is research proven to benefit all student populations, including English language learners and special education classrooms. IXL is an all-inclusive online learning and teaching solution for K-12 that accelerates achievement, saves teachers time, and more. This one platform helps you accomplish what normally would require dozens of other tools. For example, as students practice skills, IXL automatically differentiates learning to help them master concepts at their own pace. Teachers get real-time insights into how students are performing so they can provide timely support. What I love about IXL are the personalized SAT and ACT study plans. Students just need to enter the most recent test score, and IXL automatically generates a custom list of skills they should work on to improve their scores. Discover what IXL can do for your school. Visit IXL.com/PM today.
You're listening to Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast.
Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. And this week, we're going to talk about crisis-tested strategies with my special guest, Lauren Berlin. Lauren is an education leader with more than 20 years of experience helping schools navigate everything from daily challenges to real crisis, including natural disasters and student tragedies. As a school administrator, she managed million-dollar budgets, led community-wide crisis responses, learned firsthand what separates reactive management from intentional leadership. And today she works as an executive and leadership coach, helping overextended school leaders break free from the constant urgency that leads to burnout. She teaches how to tell the difference between what's truly important and what just feels urgent, so leaders can focus on the meaningful work that brought them into education in the first place. Her coaching emphasizes balance, staying calm in crisis, setting healthy boundaries, and leading with purpose instead of reaction. You can learn more about her at her website at laurenberlincoaching.com. Berlin, welcome to Principal Matters Podcast. Why don't you fill in the gaps in that intro and tell listeners something else they may be surprised to know about you?
Hi, yeah, thanks. Wow, what an intro. Um, I think, a lot of folks are really surprised to hear how non-traditional my path was into education leadership, and sort of getting to the place I'm at now. I started out not as a teacher, but as an educational and school psychologist. And took a little break to do in-home work with students with autism, parent coaching, and becoming specialized in applied behavior analysis. And right up until I became a high school assistant principal, had only worked K-8, and within the year was overseeing, the master schedule, curriculum, and instruction, and then went on to become a principal of a small continuation high school, and so that path is maybe one not as commonly taken, and so I think a lot of people are surprised to hear that. And I really like to share that because I'm just a true believer there's no one way to do anything, and there's a lot of opportunities depending on what you want to do and where your interests and passions take you.
Well, I love that. Well, you're based in the Bay Area in California, and
Yeah.
I'm out here in
Hmm.
Tulsa, Oklahoma. And just so listeners have some context, your husband's an administrator. We've met through
Hmm.
some coaching, and he was telling
Hmm.
me about your work, and I was like, "Oh, I got to meet Lauren." And because anytime I see a kindred spirit, I'm like, "Okay, what can we learn from each other?" So,
Hmm.
listeners, Lauren and I have gotten to know each other offline, and of course, I wanted to invite her into today's conversation because, Lauren, you have such an interesting story as a young leader who's also an experienced leader, who's also managed a lot of crisis and
Hmm.
difficulty that's really helped you in your coaching.
Hmm.
So, can you talk to us a little bit about your own story and the lessons you've learned in leadership while managing really tough situations?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I could talk about for hours,
Mhm.
because it's so dynamic. And I think what I would really want people to hear is that and to share a little bit of context, I have worked in communities that have had loss of life due to fires and flooding, and really had to come together as school communities to figure out how we as a school team, how do we bring back the rest of the students? How do we work with the staff? And what I want people to hear is that the range of reactions that your broader community, your students, your teachers, the range of reactions to crisis and to grief are huge. And you can't. A lot of us as educators, we like our to-do list, and we have our checklist, and we feel good about moving through things the right way or a way we're supposed to do them. And there's sort of nothing more humbling to that sort of leadership than crisis, or in community-wide sort of grief management and coping. And um, and it's really just not something you could do all the reading in the world, and you ultimately can't be prepared for all the things that are going to happen. And so, what I would offer is that the very best gift you can give people is your presence. And I think time and time again, showing up as a leader who is there and is actively listening and is not trying to solve a problem, but is simply there to be a support in, be a witness to, be a part of the community that is grieving together. You are in that community as well. And I say grieving, but it's also, with many crises, you're not unaffected by the crisis. And so, you know, rather than responding to that urge that we have as leaders to try to figure out like what's next, or how do we fix it, or what am I going to do, is really sitting back, and listening, and just being present with your community.
Mhm. Let's stay here for a second because I
Mm.
know that a lot of listeners to this show are active principals, some are aspiring leaders, some are veteran.
Mhm.
Anyone who's in this work long enough will run into a situation like you described where you don't really have a script for like how to manage this. And especially when you're managing the death of someone in your community. And so tell as much of your story as you want, but you can also decide what parts not to tell. But
Sure.
walk leaders through what's that's like to help a community grieve, especially when you're dealing with loss of life.
Yeah, I mean, and I think to anybody who Googles me can see where I've worked. So to name it
Mhm.
specifically, I worked in the Santa Barbara community for about a decade, and it was a really hard time, from a natural disaster perspective, and then just also the school sites that I worked on. I had gone years in schools without ever having faced any of those kinds of tragedies within our school community, and then in pretty short succession had, I mean, any number of them feel unmanageable, but had, two, three, four, crisis just kind of stacking, to a point that also you kind of as a leader hit crisis fatigue. um, a couple stories come to mind. One, my high school was pretty big. There were about 2,000 students when I was an assistant principal. And we had come out of sort of resolving, resolve is not the right word, but sort of had come out of, a more acute crisis. And it was also like there was a natural break in the school year. So maybe it was like we'd had a holiday, like, something, and it was like, oh gosh, it feels like I'm going to finally be able to get back into the work. And my principal at the time called me that evening at home to let me know the student that I had been pretty close to had unfortunately died the day before. Um, and I think that was one of the first times it was very personal for me. I mean, as a kid, I knew really well a student who I had been supporting. And so I think that perspective of, feeling a personal impact as well as, knowing what were some of the scripts and the things that we had built to work through, and then figuring out the interplay of what do I need? And I think that was a really important lesson because, the reality for leaders and depending on your role, you may have a lot of students. It may be affecting your community and then by ripple effect impacting you, but might not be as personal. But sometimes it is personal. And so I think I may have walked the story like in a circle a little bit, but I would say, really having the time to acknowledge for yourself, who is the right person to be leading in this moment, and that there are times it might not be you, and that's why we're all on broader teams. We have teams to tap into and other resources.
Well, we're gonna come back to, in our conversation, some feedback for leaders who are facing situations where they're running out of their own fuel. And
Mm,
so I don't want to, I want to really acknowledge
yeah,
that reality for leaders because, Lauren, anybody that's in the work long enough, um, there's this shared experience that I feel like principals have, especially and administrators have it together, where it's really hard to, unless you've been one, it's really hard to for anyone outside of our field to understand what it's like. I'll give you a quick example. My wife loves to watch series and dramas, and there was a number of years where I could not watch dramas because the trauma or the drama was so much like what I was dealing with every day already that I was
mhm,
like, "This is not entertainment. I can't sit and watch other people's stress when my whole job is managing that kind of stress for other people." I'm in a place in my life now where I don't work directly in a school every day, so I can actually watch those now and not feel like I'm reliving that trauma. Um,
yeah,
so 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 um so I want to have that context before I step into this next conversation, which is something that um, you try to help leaders understand when it comes to operating in the culture of the urgent and the emergency, and
mhm,
how you use a matrix that a lot of leaders have heard about, but some may have not, the Eisenhower matrix. How has that been helpful for you in your own leadership and helping other leaders to kind of identify within that culture of urgency and emergency where to really point their time and their
yeah.
energy?
Yeah, it's such a good point, and I agree with you about what I can and can't watch, like on TV,
Mhm.
or what I can and can't consume in terms of like media and content. Um,
Yeah.
and I go back to something years and years ago, when I was pretty young in my career. I had a leader tell me there aren't emergencies in education, and what they meant to say, or what that meant in that moment, was, things happen all the time. There are things that are going on, but we are not emergency responders as educators, I think, is the way I've come to think about that, which is to say, emergencies happen on our campuses. A student, might need emergent medical attention. I've had students that have had seizures on campus, or had, been in a fight and did require attention. My role, though, is not to provide that emergency care. My role is to make sure that the right people are there, that we're calling, that we're getting the right people there, and outside of those actual emergencies where we're, again, have a community in tragedy, or have an actual emergency in the moment on our campus. um, Most things are important, or many things are important, and some things aren't, but they feel that way. And so The Eisenhower matrix, I want to just give an overview if folks haven't seen it, but it's a 4 quadrant grid, and you can Google it and it'll come up. But it in across the quadrants, it looks at the continuum of urgent and important. And so something can be in quadrant 1 and be both urgent and important. So those are the crises we've talked about, or they are a student, potentially having a medical emergency on your campus. Those are things that require immediate reaction. You're under real pressure. Those are quadrant 1. And they don't actually happen all that often. When they do happen, they require that like full focus, but they don't happen all that often. Quadrant 2 is where leaders should spend most of their time, and that is working on what is important: your strategic work, your systems, your relationship building, your instructional leadership. It's important, but it's not always urgent. It doesn't necessarily have a deadline. It's the long work, it's the big work, it's the thought work. Quadrant 3 is I'm going to say like educator or leader kiss of death. It is urgent, but it is not important. And so these are emails that come in. These are, a family or a community member who is in the office, they're in your building first thing in the morning. They, are demanding and need your immediate attention. It is urgent and they are wanting an answer in that moment. But in terms of what's important in your instructional leadership, your strategic work, it's not necessarily connected to that. And then quadrant 4 is neither thing. It is neither urgent nor important. And those are the time wasters. Those are the things that, I can give a great give a great example. I would say like maybe sometimes it was important, but usually not. When I was a principal, I managed my school's website. We like that was just my responsibility to do. It is not in my zone of genius. Like I'm, competent enough, but I had to block off about a half hour to an hour once a week to update the dates on my website. So again,
Mhm.
not the big instructional leadership, not the big vision work, and also not urgent, but a place I spent some time. I'm sure that leaders have plenty of examples of those.
What I love about the matrix and is that it's a reflection tool, and
Mm-hmm.
reflection tools for me are what brings me clarity. So I like to use a tool called the Doing Inventory that I borrowed from work by Sam Horn called "Happiness is Not a Day in the Week." I think was the name of the resource, um, and she breaks it into things that you're doing, not doing, want to be doing, and are no longer doing. And what I like about this reflection tool, Lauren, with the urgent, important in one quadrant, the important but not urgent in the second, the third, urgent and but not important, and the fourth, not important and not urgent, is it gives you, if you have time to reflect, and I'm speaking directly to the listeners, if you could look up the Eisenhower matrix, and if you had just 5 minutes to sit down and just write in some activities that you're doing that fall into those categories, for you, the key is how do we move? There's no way we'll move all of it, but how can we move our main emphasis over to category 2, to quadrant 2? So talk about that a little bit. What are some practical
Mm-hmm.
mindset shifts that have helped you and that you see helping other leaders spend more time in quadrant 2 where they can really focus on what is important, but what's not necessarily urgent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that you asked that because I do use it as a reflection tool for leaders that I'm working with in a coaching, but also for myself. And I know for me, I start to feel like, I don't know, I would use the word annoyed, but like agitated. Like I'll be in a week where it feels like I've done a million things, but I haven't done anything. And that's a cue for me that like I'm probably in quadrant 3 and not 2. um, because I am doing a lot. I'm spinning, it's that like I'm spinning my wheels feeling. And I will kind of take out the visual of, the Eisenhower quadrant and look at my digital planner, like pull up my Google Calendar and really look at that. And for like one walk away for the listeners today is there are almost always 2 meetings you can find that you can move, that you've scheduled them for maybe this week, but they absolutely don't have to happen this week. Um, and so, giving yourself some more time and space, like on your physical calendar. And if you pull that one off, replacing it with a think block so that your time is held for you and for that brain work, for that leadership. Um, and the other appointment you can almost always find is one that someone else can do that doesn't require you. Um, and so when I start to feel in that, like I said, like for me, I would name it as like spinning my wheels. Those are two things I always go look for on my calendar. And I would say I don't think I've ever not found them. One that doesn't have to happen right now, and one that really can belong to someone else. Um, and the other thing that I would say when I think about an action that people can take today is I think email. Well, I don't think I know. Email is one of the most unproductive ways in which we all spend our time. There's lots of studies about this. Actually, there's some great ones. I've done like reads with my leadership teams in the past on some of these articles. Harvard Business Review has a couple great ones. Um, Email is a real productivity mirage. You feel like you're working, and there might be, you know, some quadrant two things buried in your email, but most of the time that isn't what we're doing. And the way I think about email is it's a boomerang. You send one, you get one. So the more time you spend in your inbox, the more full your inbox or the your inbox tends to sustain. And so um, I think what anyone who's worked with me would tell you is I'm a real relationship person. And so I have really, I think, actively worked on replacing email with quick phone calls when I was on, a school campus, walking down the hallway, or building systems for individual people. I can think about a teacher who was a first or a second year teacher that I was coaching, and she had a million questions all the time. And they were generally pretty good questions or things that she did need some support with. But having them in a stream of consciousness appearing in my inbox all day long as she thought of them was a really unsustainable way for me to give support. And so we moved that into a system, which was we're going to touch base once a week. I'm going to come to your classroom. You keep writing these things down, but we're going to discuss them together. And what you also find when you ask people to pause, right, because it isn't urgent, and a lot of those were also not important. They were just questions as she was learning. Many of them, by the time I saw her, she had figured out the answers to on her own, which there's really no better gift we can give to people who are learning their jobs than to feel competent and confident as they answer their own questions. And then it builds the system so that it just feels more sustainable for you.
There's so many things there, Lauren, so I wanna just summarize for listeners because that's how I think out loud, but, so just to get really practical, look at that matrix and then ask yourself, what are 2 meetings that right now you have scheduled that could potentially be moved or rescheduled, or someone else could do for you? And in place of those, where could you actually focus then your time on what you consider to be the most meaningful outcomes that you're working on for this year? I was in a meeting recently with some leaders where I asked the question, when is the last time you scheduled a meeting with yourself? And one of the leaders was like, "What do you mean by that, Will?" And I was like, "Well, I don't want to prescribe what I mean by that by being too direct with the question, but I'm curious, when is the last time you were able to just get alone with your own thoughts and focus on what are the most meaningful things I should be working on towards reaching our goals this year at school?" And they were really honest. Some of them were like, I can't remember the last time. Or some of them were like, the only time I'm ever alone is if I can go to the bathroom because people are constantly in my office or asking me questions. One leader I've talked to recently was telling me, and I thought this was such a great practice, that she schedules every Thursday. There's a block for every Thursday for that time of just reflecting on the calendar, what's next, what's moving ahead. Um, but the key that I hear you saying is, where within the work that you're already doing can you find an opportunity to move something so you have permission to focus on that? Also avoiding that email suck or that boomerang that's
Mhm.
affected, and then creating systems where you can communicate with people regularly so that it's not just putting out fires, it's already something you're intentionally doing. So for anyone listening right now who, let's see, when I think this episode is coming out in the spring, even though we're recording this much earlier. So you're probably in that time of the year where you're like,
Mhm.
"Yeah, right, Will and Lauren. This is
Yeah.
the end of the year. We're just right up close to Maycember when things just all get so crazy I can barely breathe." But I just will say this out loud that whatever you have prioritized will event show me your calendar, and I'm going to see what that is.
Mhm.
The things that pop up constantly are the things that may be taking most of your attention. So the last thing I want to say about that, Lauren, is something that you did that I thought that was so strategic is you when have you already intentionally scheduled time to hear from student leaders or students in particular, or from your leadership team, or from your staff and your teachers, or from community members? And so some of the most effective principals I work with, they scheduled those things intentionally in advance so that they're already setting themselves up for opportunity for the feedback instead of
Mhm.
waiting for the feedback to come to them like you would an email. They're inviting that feedback so that they can intentionally work it as a part of their schedule so they can stay focused on those things that are most important to them. Anything else you want to add to that before I change gears?
One is something I pay attention to that I really encourage other leaders to think about. Is what time of day you're scheduling things. And the example I would give is my best think time, my brain work is always first thing in the morning. So if I am scheduled to walk right in and go sit in a committee meeting, I'm losing my best time of the day to do my really intentional thought leadership, instructional leadership. So for me, those kinds of meetings are best in the afternoon because I can be present, and I'm able to maximize, right? I can focus on the relationships that are often important in those kinds of meetings. But I don't have, but like I'm not losing my kind of whatever. If I have genius moments, they're going to be in the morning. So that I think about when I schedule things. And the other, especially like you said, this is going to be coming out in the spring. Um, I really encourage people to think about, the things that we believe to be true but might not be.
Mhm.
And to give an example, I was actually having a conversation yesterday with a school leader, and they were like, "Well, when we attend this type of a meeting, typically both of us, like two co-leaders, attend. One facilitates and one note takes." And I had just said, "Do you both have to go? Like, because that's a lot of time. If this meeting is going to be 2 hours
Mhm.
long, that's 4 hours of leadership time. Must you both be there, or is that the way that you preferred to do things or historically done things, and so you're just doing it because you used to do it that way?" Um, and they were like, "Wow, I guess we've never stopped to think about that." And that's when I say somebody else might be able to do it that isn't you. We often just take things on, and I think as leaders pretty freely give away our time. But if you're giving away all your time, again, in that, like, it's that quadrant three, it's where you're getting trapped. And
Mhm.
so those are some of the opportunities that I really like to help
Oh,
people think through.
that's so practical. I'm glad you said that because occasionally I'll run into situations where leaders or educators or teachers they get connected at the hip and they do so much together that they don't stop to consider that assumption, which is, oh, we think we're getting more done together, but what would happen if we split and I manage this, you manage that. And you and I both know what happens when you do that. Especially now, if you're in a mentoring relationship and you're coaching and training someone up, that makes sense. But when you have a group of experienced leaders and they can divide that, they divide and conquer. You actually exponentially increase the amount of work you're getting done when you are able to spread that responsibility out and you're both doing those things um, without having to be in the same room or consider that as a group of 3 or 4 or 5 on a team, whatever the size is.
Mhm.
You talk a lot about how urgency addiction also leads to burnout, and so I wanna bring
Mhm.
this full circle because
Yeah.
all of us, I think anybody who's done this work long enough has run into that wall, and so that's why I wrote my 3rd book, Pause, Breathe, Flourish, which because I wanted to just acknowledge that crash that a lot of leaders hit, and invite them back to reflective and purposeful and intentional cycles and practices. And so do you, Lauren. So, can you
Mhm.
share some lessons from your own journey? And what are some real time strategies that you found to help leaders break that cycle of addiction that leads to burnout so they can stay focused?
Sure. Um, I want to say kind of two things about the connection I see between the urgency and burnout, because then I think they'll make, some of the
Thank
strategies
you.
make more sense. One, um, we responding to everything, right, is urgency. Treating everything that comes up across your desk as an emergency. It it puts us in a place of being reactive. So, sort of in my mind, by responding urgently, we are in a state of reactivity. And if you're in a state of reactivity, you're not doing almost always the thing that you're most passionate about as an educator, the work of your heart, the work of your brain, like why you came to be in your leadership position or in your teacher leadership position, right? You came to those roles because you wanted to build relationships with students and families. You wanted to impact your community. You have, these visions and hopes and goals for your school. And when you are in reactive mode, you're isolating like on a totally different parallel track to where you want to be. And so, and I was just, came to mind thinking of an example who, a leader was like, I, she's like, I don't know where to start. Everything is on fire. And the truth is, like, even when, like, if you think about firefighters, like firefighters find a place to start, right? Like they have to look for an origin place. And so and I can't tell you that there's never one answer, right? Because everyone's situations are so specific. But what you do need to do is is pause. And whether, and I'm not saying like, yeah, take 48 hours, like that's not realistic in these roles, but even like an email comes in and there's somebody in the office and there's a kid who's still waiting for you to call their parents, like you do have three or four things happening in this moment. Take 60 seconds. Everyone can wait 60 seconds to take a few breaths, like, dark your screen monitor for a minute and just think like, what even is next in my day today, right? Like how do I move through these four things that all need my attention? And it might be, right, that like the IEP meeting is starting in 25 minutes. You do still need to get this kid's parents on the phone and somebody else is in the office. And so, you know, the pause allows you to make a thoughtful decision about how you're going to respond to those three things. My hope is that if you're listening to this, you're recognizing that like one or two of them can be delegated. Somebody else, an assistant, a support person, the academic counselor can call that student's parents and let them know you as the leader need to have a chat with them, but you've had to step into a meeting. This is important. And because it's important, you want to give it the time it deserves, which isn't the 5 minutes you have right now. I think that's a really important reframe for people. We tend to want to respond so quickly because getting people on our calendar fast feels like we're being responsive. I would argue that giving people the time they deserve, even if it's in a few days, is a better value to the relationship than fitting them in quickly when you know you don't have the time to authentically support whatever that communication is. So I don't know. I've touched on a couple of things there. I guess that's where I would start.
Wow. Um, so I just want to, I'm always trying to speak directly back to our listeners. So
Hmm.
I want to make sure that I acknowledge the truth that this is hard work. It's funny, Lauren, because right now at the time that we're recording, it's basketball season, and I've been watching my favorite NBA team, which is the Oklahoma City Thunder, where I live. And as I watch these guys play, I realize like it doesn't matter how professional, how talented, how highly paid they are. To play that game requires this super high level of athleticism and strategy and commitment and grit and dedication and all these things that make it for a good game. Um, when I was a teacher, I had this perception that my principals or my leaders were doing the best that they could, but but I imagined their world was a little more like mine, like in the classroom, and that if I became a school leader at some point, that I would want to respond to my teachers in the way I would wanted them to respond to me. And it was, I think, probably the very first day I was an assistant principal when I had that very moment you're describing with the parent and the kid waiting and the phone call and all of that. And I was like, I remember like feeling like physically, mentally, emotionally paralyzed. Like, oh my gosh, how do you respond to all of these things at once? Now, over time, fast forward several years, you learn how to pace yourself. You learn how to manage those crises. But if you never get away from, I'm going to come back to those words you used, the urgency addiction, which is that as long as I'm doing something that's putting out the fires or responding to these, then I must be doing a good job until you recognize all the way back to that. How am I focused on the most important outcomes of this work? Then you're stuck in the urgent.
Mhm.
And so it's a shift.
Mhm.
And so I don't want anybody listening to this to feel like neither Lauren nor I understand the complexities and the craziness of a typical day in the life of a leader. But we also have the joy now of being in schools and coaching great leaders who never have perfect days. But when you see somebody that can refocus back on the important, you see people that make that shift back, you see people that have that clarity, then you see that momentum and the impact of what it does for students and teachers in the community over time.
Mhm.
I think sometimes we have this perception of like schools like, oh, that's a great principal because they have a great personality or they have the right demographics or they have the, we want to fill in the reason why there's such a great principal. And I'm not saying we've got it all figured out, Lauren, but the research and the practice and our experiences with leaders have shown me that everything you're talking about today is a part of that formula for what makes the work sustainable.
Mhm.
So I know we need to wrap up in this. I don't want this to be the first time or last time my listeners connect with you. I want this to be an ongoing relationship. So as we wrap up, I want you to just share any other words of advice that you would have for school leaders to think about as they're trying to break away from the urgent addiction into the more meaningful practice. And how can listeners stay connected with you and your wonderful resources?
Great. Well, the first piece of advice I would give to everybody is just like when you feel it, for me, it's like often in my gut. For many people, it's in their chest, like in that, like everything is terrible. Like I can't do this right now. Um, what your body's telling you is you need to pause. And so even 60 seconds like is worth it. And so figure out what that looks like for you. It doesn't mean you need to shut off your computer and take a 30-minute break. 60 seconds, if that's what you can give today, is a great starting place. And the smallest shift, like I said, if you're on the urgent emergency addiction track, and it's so easy to get there, this job like can really quickly ramp us onto that track. The other track, it's like you can't even see it because it's running parallel to you. It's like when there's like the barrier on the freeway, like you can't even see the other side of the road. So you have to pause. And so just figuring out what that looks like for you. For new leaders, what I would say is just remember that you're not the first responder to everything. I would say like immediacy and busyness isn't the best badge of honor. um, but it can feel that way. And so really starting to think about what are the relationships that you're building and who are the people on your team. I mean, and I can think of, I was so fortunate one of my first 2 years as an assistant principal to have amazing administrative assistants who, we really figured out how to work together in a way that,
Mm.
supported my work, but also, and I'll have to share this link with her now because I'm going to mention her. But the second assistant that I had, she got into that work because she wanted to become a counselor, and she is, and she's doing an amazing job. And I think for me supporting her in her role, like it was symbiotic. We were supporting each other, and it was really beautiful. So you're not meant to do this alone. To the new leader and to the veteran leader, you know, saying yes to everything is saying yes to nothing at all. Because not every single initiative can have your time and your focus. And so, what are your? It goes back to the Essentialism book, which we read as a group of leaders years and years ago. But you know, if it's not a heck yes, you know, where does it need to fall? And so, really, you know, just remembering you're saying yes to everything. You're not really saying yes to much at all.
Oh, that's so good. How can our listeners stay connected with you, Lauren?
Yeah, you mentioned my website, laurenberlincoaching.com. I'm under the same name on LinkedIn. And I send a weekly newsletter out through Substack, which you'll also find in my on my website and in my LinkedIn profile. And would love to stay connected. This is a lot of fun.
Well, Principal Matters listeners, you know me, so you know that I could keep asking Lauren more and more and more questions because every time you say something, Lauren, it makes me think of something else that I want to add. But I just want to wrap this up today by just reminding leaders that you are going to manage things this year that no one ever could have imagined. And when you are in those crisis moments, especially like Lauren said at the beginning, um, being present and being visible is the most important thing you can do. When you're not in those situations, um, or when you can determine the difference between the crisis and something that is urgent, um, those are important distinctions because there's also going to be such important, meaningful outcomes that can only happen if you're the one paying attention to them. And so, permission to say heck yes to those most important things. Um, I just have to tell this quick story, Lauren. When I was being coached in my own work, my good friend Danny Bauer does coaching with me. He also does podcasting, and I've invited him to coach me in my new work. And he gave me an assignment to just catalog the use of my time because I was trying to make sure I was maximizing my time. So he's like, Will, for a week, just keep a log of every time you're spending on email, how much time you're spending advertising, how much time you're training, how much time you're spending writing. So started doing this for a day or two. And then when I met with Danny, he said, Hey, Will, how did that activity go? Because he was trying to help me to see what should I say heck yes to and what should I say heck no to. And I'm just going to, we're adults. He was like, figure out what you need to say hell no to and what you need to say hell yes to. And so when we got on the meeting, Danny said, Will, how did that activity go? And I said, Danny, I started it and then I went, hell no. I don't have time. I don't have time to like write down everything I'm doing for a whole week. And he just laughed because he recognized that I applied that lesson immediately. It didn't mean I didn't have clarity, but it just meant I'm not doing this because it's so,
Yeah.
even as you guys are listening to Lauren and me today, I never want to be responsible for prescribing behavior. Apply this for how it works for you. And then just take just one thing away from today's conversation and apply it in a way that's going to be most meaningful for your work so that you can say the hell yes and the hell no's in the ways that match for your leadership style. So Lauren, thank you. This has been delightful.
You're welcome. It was really fun. I agree.
And laurenberlincoaching.com. And until next time, thanks for doing what matters. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Principal Matters.